Good evening. Thank you very much, Cecily, and thank you all for joining us here this evening. I'm just going to launch straight into it. Antony, I just wonder whether we can begin by talking about this exhibition and the sort of genesis of the exhibition. It was just a few months ago that Jay Jopling...
it was his idea, wasn't it?
Yes,
it's important to say that first.
Yeah, it was all, yeah. And it was the idea was to basically bring together this early group of lead works from the early part of your career, which, from the late 70s and early 80s, which were arguably the sort of inflection point for that sort of set you on the course of your trajectory as an artist. And so we thought it'd be a good idea to kind of bring these works together. But can you just say what your initial response was to the invitation?
Well, I said, "Where's the work?" Well, he'd been somehow fishing in the great, world soup of secondary market works, and seemed to have a handle on one or two. And I think that made all the difference, because I've got one or two works from that period. And I have to say that I only saw the show at the beginning of last week, and I was amazed. I just, the works in the show had never seen each other before, had never had a conversation, and then there they were. And they seemed to be generating quite a lot of traction. And I was particularly thrilled with the ground floor. These 5 works, on one level, very simple, very mute, and yet together, well, the work called Shield 2 has never ever been shown. Oh, that is the very...
Yeah, can we talk a little about this is the work, really?
That is the beginning of everything. So yeah. I'd finished at Goldsmiths. I'd gone for a holiday to Ireland to look at Wisnach, which is the old centre, the umbilical centre of Ireland, which was associated with the whole Druidic cult. I'd written a thesis on the stone for... I don't know why you had to write a thesis, but I had to write a thesis for my MA. And I wanted to go and see the Truro stone, which is an incredible omphalos, which is in the West Coast. And I don't know whether it was because of that omphalos Truro stone that I met this stone, anyway, on the beach somewhere north of Clifton in Connemara, and I brought it back. And I brought it almost as a sort of trophy, and it came with me to the Slade and sat there. And at Goldsmiths, my work had become very complicated. I was quite influenced by people like Martin Naylor. Anyway, I really felt I needed to start again, and I needed to start a kind of audit of real things. And the stone was almost like a talisman. So I brought the stone. It sat there in my studio. I must have had an idea of getting some lead, so I got some roofing lead and began that whole thing of taking a sheet of lead. And lead is extraordinary stuff because it is a metal. It has all that, in a way, authority of metal, but at the same time it's malleable. And the minute it begins to form a compound curve, it becomes stiff. But while it's still a sheet, you can bend it very, very easily. And I guess I was just attracted by this metal that seemed to absorb light as well as reflect it. That isn't true in its state now because it's oxidized. Anyway, I learned how. I bought myself a rubber hammer. I didn't know then that you actually had to dress lead with a boxwood mallet, and I covered the stone, thinking of dividing it a bit like you might make seams on a coat or a shirt. And it sat there right through my first year at the Slade. And what else was I doing? I was finding other stones and carving their surface with the kinds of lines that you find on your fingers or your hands. And I was taking tree trunks and unpeeling them to reveal the tree inside. I didn't know about Panoni then. The minute I found out about his work, I stopped that. But anyway, this whole thing was a direct engagement with the skin of things, or the relationship between substance and appearance. And there came a time when I thought, well, I better just see my stone again. And I cut the skin off the new lead case that I'd made. And that was a eureka moment. Here I had the stone, here I had the case for the stone, here was the thing, here was the image of the thing, the referent of the thing. And then I realized, I can make a work that actually deals with, I suppose, my feelings of the precarity of the time. So this is the time of protect and survive, rising nuclear armament on both the Soviet and the American side. The sense that actually, the biggest risk to our species, to humankind, was going to be, assured mutual destruction. And
you were also talking, I think you talked previously about also the sort of indexical link within this work. It's allowed you to kind of get an imprint of the object from the object itself and sort of remove it. Can you kind of expand on, because it has a direct relation?
That was the I think that moment when I had the case and the thing, and then recased the thing, made two more cases, filled one with water and allowed the other one to stay empty or be filled with air. This was the point where I realized that you could collapse, in a way, the artist model, or that whole idea of making a copy of something, and have, as it were, the referent as part of the thing that you made. And you could say, well, there's a long tradition of that in terms of reliquaries. Or indeed, something that I've become more and more interested in, the idea of the hand stencil, that is perhaps one of the oldest forms in art. You find it in Peshmerga, you find it in the Sulawesi, in the Maros caves from much, much earlier. If Peshmerga is about 18,000, the Maros caves are between 25 and 37,000. And what is a handprint? A handprint is an indexical trace of where a person once was, or the sign of their hand. And I guess that idea of the index that kind of substitutes or replaces the notion of an image, replaces the notion perhaps even of a symbol, because it's something else. It's the forensic kind of proof of the existence of something. It's a real, like snow prints, or the traces left by an animal in the ground. And this was an escape, I think, from I guess a long tradition of making the perfect copy, but through observation, through distance, through, in a way, the objective sort of virtuous copying of the look of something. So that whole question of the relationship between substance and appearance began with Lansienaire, but I think Lansienaire was also then this idea of making something that became a seed of the future. So this idea of dealing with danger and making a work that in some way was protective or had implicated within it the idea of hope of regeneration.
I remember you saying when you made it, you kind of, you didn't sleep that night. You were kind of realising actually you were on the brink of something that was going to set you on your path.
Yeah, it was a really extraordinary feeling. I just felt this is real. This is a first step. I didn't know what was going to be next, but it was the first step on something that felt serious and important. And it was like, right, I'm going to do this all my life, and it's real. It's a serious kind of project. And this work that is called Shield 2 is made over a convex mirror, and I think this was another kind of meditation on that idea of appearance. In many senses, we take selfies, but we also look in the mirror. That in Lacanian kind of psychoanalysis, that's an important moment in which we recognize our individuality, or the uniqueness of our identity, you might say. And I guess this was a gesture just to say that wasn't enough. And was it possible to evoke the presence of something without actually dealing with its appearance? Because appearance are mutable and accidental, and I wanted to deal with something else. And it was great. I'd had this. I made this at the same time. These are actually the offcuts of making L'Ancienne, and never shown it. So it was nice to have an opportunity to show it. And it was one of those 5 objects that began to have a conversation that made sense in the show.
And you're kind of exploring the material possibilities of the lead as well. You're kind of
learning how to solder it. I'd never studied plumbing. No, but it's really good fun. I tell you, because you kind of have to tin up the edges. You cut it with a pair of snips, and then you get really lovely bright silver, like the cut edge. But then you have to tin that up, and you run a soldering iron along and lay in some plumber's solder, and then when the 2 bits come together, when it's really lovely because you have a blowtorch and you can just lay the solder. It just falls in between the 2 edges. Anyway, I probably never got better at it, but it was good fun doing it.
And so another key work that's in this space is natural selection, which we've borrowed from Tate. And as you can see here, I think this is an image from Tate when it was originally shown. It's 24 objects encased in lead, 12 which are man-made, 12 which are natural or organic items, which you laid out in a kind of Darwinian procession of sorts. And in this work, you talked about it trying to create this dialectic between sort of destruction and creation. Can you kind of expand on it?
I guess, we get taught, in kind of, theory, about the relationship between point, line, plane, and then form. And I suppose on one level this is a model of morphological progression that uses some reference to that. But I think more importantly, for me it was really fun, like trying to find the next object. So we start with a pea and you go to a pencil and then a carrot. And then the carrot turns into a masonry chisel that turns into I can't actually remember it all perfectly, but it's a kind of consequences game. And it was good fun finding the objects. But obviously, right from the beginning, I was just thinking of this. I mean, on one level, it was like sort of equations or rhyming poetry. You just had to find the thing to fit. But right from the beginning, it was like how collapsing the dialectic between a naturally made and a culturally made or a humanly made thing. You're sort of trying to find like sharp pointed things or the round enclosing things, and that you know, in a way begins to interrogate sexual differences. So there is, you know, there's a vibrator in there, there's a banana in there. You know, there are lots of phallic-y things, but then there are lots of fruity things. And in the middle, there's a fruity thing that is an egg, and there's a fruity thing that's a grenade, and they're object 11 and 12 in the sequence. And I suppose, yeah, the overall title of the work is Natural Selection. Natural selection could be seen as you know, an argument for survival of the fittest. The idea that somehow the species that survive at the expense of other species that perhaps don't survive so well. And I suppose in this reality check that I think I was doing, I didn't want to, as it were, make grand narrative works. I wanted to deal with things that were right here, right now. I didn't want to remake them. I wanted to respect them and acknowledge them, but find a new context for them where maybe new meanings would emerge. And I think out of that, in a way, interrogation of the idea of natural selection, and then the idea of, well, what, you know, you could say, you know, sexual procreation is the way that certainly in mammals we survive and continue. How does that relate to violence? And yeah, anyway, it became there's no final conclusion in this, and it began, I think, a realization that art perhaps could be a zone of interrogation, of skeptical kind of looking at the world around and trying to find ways of putting it together that open thoughts and feelings. And I think together, you know, together with Land, Sea and Air, which I showed them together at the Whitechapel in that first show. Yeah, I think they've continued, and it was just great to see them again, because they're still doing the same job.
And you sort of touched upon it. I mean, you've talked also about, I think when you and I were talking about the works that would be in the exhibition, that you sort of always regarded your project as kind of anthropological and existential rather than art historical. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit?
Well, I guess, yeah, I may go on about this too much, because here we are celebrating a show at White Cube, and what a wonderful gallery and what a wonderful support it's been to me. But I am very, very aware of the valve, in a way, of access, that it is through the museum or the gallery, through either the in a way, the pathways of commerce or the pathways of academic kind of acceptability, that in a sense we are offered a platform in which to engage with art. And when I look at the deep history of art, that was never the case. Somehow art was always part of the everyday world, was as natural as what we're doing now, talking to each other. In talking to each other, we're making sense for each other. Through each other's experience, we're coming to some common understanding. And you might say, you know, the dances people danced, the music people made, the architecture that they made in cultures that didn't have banks or surplus or armies. They didn't have something to defend. Art was an absolutely natural way in which life expressed itself. And I still believe that as a fundamental, what is art for? Art is the way that, we know that we're alive. And so, I mean, I did Arc and Anth at university as the first part of my tripos, and it has remained a touching stone for me. So reading La Pensée Sauvage by Lévi-Strauss, and then going on to Le Don, and looking at all of Malinowski's, and then leading on to reading people like Hugh Brody, Maps and Dreams and The Other Side of Eden. They became incredibly important reference points for me about how art, once it is in the world and once it is shared, becomes something useful. Mm-hmm. And I still believe that somehow I don't think that my work, as it were, contains sacred truths or kind of the knowledge of the tribe. It's almost the opposite of that. I think of the work as somehow materialized questions that might be useful for everyone to as it were, use as forms of looking. Maybe a lens through which to look.
And also something that actually was touched upon in one of the interviews in the catalogue is about your sort of engagement with sort of ecological or environmental concerns, and there's a kind of dimension to it. And I think it's kind of ridden through all of these works. You've engaged with this dichotomy between sort of the natural and the man-made, but also the kind of very fragile balance that between humanity and our planet's ecosystem. I mean, I'm using here as an example seeds, which of course can be read in both ways, in that it's actually bullets that 45 caliber. But can you just expand a little again on your sort of your engagement? I mean, because it seems to be you were kind of there right at the beginning, kind of aware of this almost impending crisis. The crisis at the time of making was, the sort of sense of an Armageddon shadow. And now we're sort of moving into a different kind of crisis. But
yeah, I don't know whether you saw. I did do a very minor contribution to a series on the BBC called Blood and Beauty. And there is a relationship. I mean, whether it's Charles I's collection in a time of, pretty constant warfare in Europe, or we think about the Medici's funding wars between the Habsburgs and others, and yet being the greatest patrons of art. And you can say, what is the relationship between art fairs and arms fairs? What is the relationship between war and creativity? I think that the truth is that there's a very profound one. I think that at those moments when we feel most vulnerable are the very moments where actually we are most acutely aware of beauty, perhaps, or of tenderness, of when our livelihoods and our homes are most threatened. We cherish the things that give us comfort, that give us shelter, and I don't have any over Hegelian kind of understanding of this. I'm just aware that human nature is made up of these two, you could say, absolutely opposing forces, and yet they are fundamentally linked. And that's where something like this comes from. Calling a pile of bullets seeds is on the one hand, a very dumb thing to do. I think it's a provocation. I think, while half of the world is starving. We have in Eastern Africa we have got a humanitarian disaster. The other half of the world is suffering from obesity. We have not learned the basic thing that I think the colonized have to teach us, that when resources are scarce. They are to be shared. And this is what, it doesn't matter whether it's the tupik of the high north or the Uea of the Amazonian basin. That's the way that life goes. And I guess, what has this all got to do with art? I suppose that art can touch on those relationships with the earth that sustains us. And there's something that has happened in terms of our, you could say, civilization, if that is to be taken in the classical sense of what happens to human society when it lives in the city and takes all those advantages that the city gives of communication and production, that it becomes increasingly separated from, as it were, the source of the generative source of the earth. And I think I have, for better or worse, always been very aware of that, and tried to acknowledge it. But I don't have it. I don't have any answers, except that I think that art, insofar as it is a witness of the time in which it is made, has to acknowledge the tensions of that time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'd just like to take us back now briefly to the exhibition, because there's a kind of two distinct groups of works that we've included, and there is a kind of transition from the sort of objects in reality to then this idea of existence. So put another way, we move from the world of things to the world of experience. And in the lower ground floor at the gallery, we encounter these early body case works in which you used the human form as a vessel and as a receiver. So how did you arrive at this idea of using your own body as a mould to capture experience and contain it?
It's a really stupid idea, isn't it? But anyway, it was logical. So after having done the kind of the trees, the rocks, the tools, and the fruits and vegetables, I started thinking more and more about what the things were that sustained. So it goes well with your last question. And I made two works. One was called Bed, which was made out of 600 loaves of Mother's Pride, out of which I ate my own volume, but in two halves. So it was a silhouette, three-dimensional silhouette that opened up like that. And it was called Bed because it looked just like a bed. It was about sort of 1'6" deep and about 4'5" wide and 6'6" long. And then I made a work called Room, which was all of my clothes. So it was underpants, vest, shirt, trousers, socks, shoes, pullover jacket, all cut at about 8mm thick ribbons. So imagine unpeeling an orange, but doing it with your shirt. Button up the shirt first, and then kind of just keep. And where you get to a break, you tie it together. So you end up with about 1.5 kilometers of ribbon. But the trick is you have to leave everything in the same relationship as it was on the body, but you've expanded it to a 18-foot square, where it's really like a fence. And I was pleased with that work. I used the last set of clothes that my parents had bought for me at university, which I no longer sort of recognized as being mine. So it was a pair of Church Brothers shoes from my dad, a Viella shirt, and this was a sort of rite of passage. It was sort of, this is what I'm going to leave behind. And I'd made, this enclosure that you couldn't get into, but all of the layers of lead from those good Church Brothers shoes were kind of, dished out on the floor. So it was almost like this thing it was like a boxing ring with these impressions of footfall on the floor. Anyway, so between what you eat and what you wear, you might say, is where you live. So I just had to acknowledge, well, if I've been interested in the found object, in like trying to think about describing the human condition and where we are by the things that are, as it were, the extended arm of technology, or the things that we touch every day, or the things that we eat every day, I think I've got to bite the bullet and use that bit of the found world that I find myself inside. In fact, the only bit of the found world that I live inside. And that led to this. And actually, the very first work we made was more or less in this position that became the position, the position of the witness that is in the show.
And you were very ably assisted by the artist Vicky
Wiccan,
Parsons, which. And can you just say, just again for practical, so what was the actual process here?
Well, you can see I'm lightly dressed in a diaphanous costume. It's good cling film. They don't make it like that anymore because this was really, really sticky, and now they've decided that that's toxic in some way. But it used to stick to itself. So we did use Vaseline originally, but even with Vaseline, somehow the pubes and under the armpits, they always got clogged up, and it's just really, I'm sure that people have experience of depilation, but I found it really uncomfortable. So we went into the cling film mode, and it was the best thing. So you'd get wrapped in cling film, which could give you a good barrier, and then it's just a matter of staying calm, still, and without moving for as long as it takes. So something like this would take an hour or so.
Which is an incredibly, I think most of us would feel incredibly claustrophobic for an hour encased in plaster. You spent some time in India as a young man and studied in India and studied Buddhism. How did that kind of have a sort of relationship to you being able to sit and stay in one position?
I think it certainly helped. I studied Vipassana meditation with S.N. Goenka. I ended up doing about 10 of his 10-day courses. And you spend 16 hours a day very still. And it was strange because I went to India because I like meeting people and I like experiencing other cultures and ways of doing things. But actually, the biggest adventure I went on was, I think, that experience of discovering the space inside the body that you have to be entirely still to enter, and I think it changed my life. So that removal that I had done with objects from, as it were, their business in life, I now applied to my body, and it's an extraordinary thing that happens that once the body becomes still and you close your eyes and dwell in it, you discover this space that is, as I often say, objectless, edgeless, and with this extraordinary capability of infinite expansion. And the first work that I made is simply called Mould, and it's on show now at Tate Britain, was a plaster mould, quite thick, that I covered in lead. It lies on its back, and you see through its open mouth the darkness inside. And I think of the darkness inside these lead body case works as being the equivalent of the darkness that we can all find the minute we close our eyes but are conscious and still. And you could say, that's now become the leitmotif of the work, that rather than being the portrait of somebody, or rather than being the freeze frame in a narrative, here is the body as a place that is the forensic evidence of where a body once was, and is the invitation for anybody to imaginatively inhabit. It's still not clear to me whether that invitation of the work is fully kind of taken, because it's asking quite a lot. I mean, I think the way that people learn to read art is very, very much related to representation and saying, oh, well, that's the Virgin Mary and that's St. Thomas or whatever. And I may be asking things that are, in a way, foreign to our culture, but yeah, it remains to be seen whether these things can be used as imaginative vessels.
Because, and it's interesting talking about the sort of body as being the kind of primary site for knowing the world. And in a sense that kind of links to sort of, Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology of perception. I mean, were you looking at other philosophers and other writers when you were thinking about this work, or is
I think
something retrospectively?
Yeah, phenomenology is, whether it's Husserl or Merleau-Ponty or Heidegger, very, very, very important, I think, for me as a recognition that the body is the instrument through which everything in the world becomes internalized, and it's also the vessel through which anything that you, as it were, want to contribute to the world is carried through. And I say that, but with a very profound kind of admission that the works are not gestural, they're not dramatic, they're a kind of registration. So I think of the works being most familiar with a standing stone made by the early farmers, for example, where they are. You could say here is a natural thing that has made its journey through. Maybe it's a granite stone that has made its way from being liquid igneous rock to becoming solidified, becoming part of the surface, to then lying on the surface of the planet. And then through a human act of will, it's been stood up. It becomes then a marker in space and calls upon our time and asks us to in some way, register our existence through the stone to a wider reality. And it's good that you put this up, because I think of this in a sense. You could say formally this is the opposite of a standing stone. Here is a splayed body that is absolutely flat on the ground. But I think this is my version of a Madonna and child, or a mother and child. Here the earth is the mother, the body is the child, and I'm asking you to sense, if you like, our total dependency on the planet, on the earth, and everything that it gives. And this was very consciously against, you could say, the vertical. Well, the most familiar trope in Western sculpture is the male vertical standing figure. I've made a lot of those, but
which we arrive at here. Yeah.
But on the whole, I think I'm very, very keen on the ground and acknowledging the ground.
Yeah. And so actually, as you say, I mean, in this exhibition, the only fully upright figure is this work entitled Home in the World 2, which is, as you can see here, is a striding figure with its head replaced by a 6-metre long house of sorts. The figure itself, it has these kind of echoes with like the motif of Giacometti's Walking Man. And there is a suggestion of movement, but yet when you look at it closely, both feet are very firmly planted on the ground. And what were you trying to express with this work?
I think, the urge to roam that is very, migration is an absolutely intrinsic part of our species' nature, and our need for home, our need for a nest, our need for a place to in a way, nurture our souls, our identities. And I think this was my attempt to reconcile those two things. And it's interesting to me to see this now shown here. This is only the second time, I think, that we've ever shown it. And see the connection with a work called Passage, which was another 6-metre long, or maybe longer, maybe it was a 12-metre long tunnel, closed at one end, but in human form, but made more abstract, that you were invited to enter yourself. I think that this, paradoxically expresses the stillness of sculpture while indicating the potential for movement within the body, where the narrative is in the head itself, and then that became an actual invitation in the later work called Passage.
I thought this was an interesting image just to pull up, because you've got these incredible sketchbooks, and you talked previously about carrying your sketchbook with you at all times, and so here you have a sort of sketch for Home in the World above. I suppose a kind of prototype of sorts for
early idea of Angel of the North. Yeah, you call them incredible sketchbooks. They're not really. They're just very, very quick notations of things that come into your head, and you just got to get them down quick because something else will happen and you'll forget them. So I always have. I don't know if I've got one in the back. Yes, I have. I always have one of these. Yeah. So there's always, there are always things to think about that you need to kind of, and it's great because you can do it on the tube, it's so there's either one on in my back pocket or by the bed, just in case something happens. But both of those, just to go back, I mean, both of those are in a way a meditation on you could say the extended arm, or the things that we have had to. I'm very aware that we're born without fur. Well, we have a bit left up here and on odd bits, but that we are extraordinarily vulnerable as an animal. We have always had to find ways of surviving, and you could say, we borrowed the skins of animals in order to survive. We ate their flesh in order to survive. We loved those animals, but we killed them. That could be at the very root of this dialectic between creativity and destruction. And I suppose for me, those early thoughts about the angel were thinking about 1911, the flight of the Kittiwake, Kandinsky's Über das Geistige in der Kunst, concerning the spiritual in art, where what was the necessary kind of extension of imagination in terms of bodily morphology. And I suppose with these two, I'm thinking of one. What do we give up? What do we give up when we have the extended arm of technology, particularly in the digital age? Well, it's happening, and it's happening to all of us. The degree to which the angel has given up its arms. It's given up, in a way, everything to do with hand-eye, heart coordination in favor of this miraculous extension of the body that allows us to leave the world. I think of that or leave the surface of the world. I think of that as a kind of metaphor or parable. And that's what's happening, I mean, in terms of the cyber world, that we now, this social experiment that none of us, in a way, signed up for, but it has totally changed the way that we live. This is becoming real for us, that in a curious way, we look after our bodies like they were pets and they have to be exercised and fed, but in many senses, most of our agency is now through screen-based technology. And I guess that's another question about what happens to the imagination, and certainly in a time of AI, where the obsession about machine learning has become, exponentially kind of shared. What that means in terms of our species nature, and whether we go down the Ray Kurzweil route and accept that we are already partially cyborgs, that when we leave the house and we leave our phone behind, that we've left our external brain, that we can no longer properly function. I mean, this is really, really serious. Mm-hmm. It means that it's an absolute kind of caesura and an evolutionary moment. I just don't feel that we have fully acknowledged.
Mm. Yeah.
Sorry, I went off on one.
No, that's sort of coming back to the body in the sort of indexical link of the body, not as a representation or an icon, but actually rather than as an imprint of that body's reality. And I think this is most manifest in this work, this blanket drawing, where it's in the form of the negative space left by your body. For me, it kind of brings to mind the sort of blast shadows from Hiroshima. I don't know whether that was what you were yourself thinking about.
I've always been amazed by them.
Yeah, and it's also, it's a kind of body caught in flight. But what were you trying to do with these particular works?
I suppose the same thing this relates to the thoughts about our furlessness. I mean, we need the warmth that comes from there was a wonderful warehouse down in Limehouse where you could buy old hospital blankets, and this is an old white hospital blanket made out of pretty raw wool, and I made very few of these. This is made with Cornish kaolin white clay. I made some with London Thames mud, and here is the position of the body in sleep. You might say a bit disturbed sleep, but anyway, me lying, Vic and Drew around me. I then, everywhere that I was lying was left raw with the wool, and then I pressed the clay into the rest of the blanket. I haven't shown these that often, but when you put them up on the wall, this image of or kind of trace of a body at rest becomes a body desperately trying to keep afloat. That upper edge becomes like a kind of cross section of a wavy sea, and the body, far from being at rest, is now desperately trying to breathe and stay above water. And this was. I think this was an important object to put in the context of the lead works downstairs.
And it is, as you say, it's titled Blanket Drawing, and drawing's been a very critical part of your practice. And so for the exhibition, we selected a number of works on paper from the mid-'80s, which was around the time of making these early lead sculptures. And I think, the writer Michael Newman around that time wrote about your drawings, that the body is not so much seen from the outside as felt from the inside, which I think is a really great way to describe them. Can you tell us a little bit about these works? And I mean, were they made prior to making the sculptures? Were they made retrospectively, or?
We made it exactly the same time, I think they were really important for me to go back to the previous one just for a second, to in a way understand what I was doing. So on the drawing on the right that is called Seed, here I'm meditating in a way on the bipolar, you could say, nature of the body, that we have a brain that has two hemispheres that is sort of indicated in these two halves. We have two eyes, we have two ears, we have two arms and legs, we have two ovaries or testicles, we have two kidneys, we have two lungs, we have four chambers of the heart, and somehow the dialogue between our internal organs and the relationship between the left and the right hemisphere of the brain is the kind of, you could say that's the interaction between all of those things that is kind of our internal spatial engine. And then, this position of the crouching body, in this case looking up, the body, you could say, at its most compressed, the body taking up the least space possible, but at the same time with all of that potential, the idea of I'm always much more interested in the immanent than I am in the apparent. I want to think about potency, about possibility, rather than, as it were, describing a dramatic moment. And I guess, with the next one that you showed before, this is called Ransom. And this was another way of me thinking about, I guess, this idea of acknowledging the body as a place, but then making this reference to that period of C.S. Lewis's writing, which I read as a boy. There are maybe 3 or 4 science fiction novels that are called things like Voyage to Venus or The Hideous Strength. But the character in it was called Ransom, and he used to travel through the cosmos, through the universe in a coffin. And I really liked that notion that I then thought of, well, you can dispense with the coffin. We can make a box for the body out of lead, which lead has a long association with lining of coffins. But to acknowledge the fact that the body is itself a spaceship, we are given, as it were, this vehicle through which we negotiate our passage through space and time. And I think this was a way of me saying, well, for Ransom, he had to have a box. I'm going to make a box for the body. So this was me explaining to myself, I think, the bigger inference of what was happening in the sculpture.
Exactly. And so you sort of brought it back to lead, and obviously this is the material that we're sort of focusing on this show. Do you think you'll ever work in lead again? I mean, do you think you'd ever work with that material?
No, I have. I made 4 works in lead quite recently. They're all called Breath or Breathe, and they are expanded body forms that become like contained clouds, and they refer back to a work that I made in 1986 called Mind. But I ought to say a bit more about what I think the lead is doing. because it is this membrane that in a way holds the memory of the place a body once was, and by implication inviting it to be occupied imaginatively by anyone that possesses a body. But I think that the tradition within alchemy that lead is, as it were, the ore material of transmutation, with its idea that it refers to nigredo, or the lowest kind of level of the transformation of matter, to sublatio, or sublatio, the kind of the final transformation into gold. I sort of, without referring to that, I just like the idea that in works like natural selection, we have this indexical register of a real object, and in that case, the object is actually in there. But the lead is the medium that translates that thing into imagination. So that it is the vehicle by which matter becomes mind, or an object is replaced for the viewer by its imaginative equivalent. And I still, it's still an open question whether that we are so, I think, conditioned to think of all art that refers to the body as being representational, that I fear that for many people these are just very, very inadequate representations of the human body, which they are. I mean, I have to admit that they are. If that's what you're looking for, a perfect likeness, they are absolutely, disastrous.
Well, on that note, it's been such a wonderful, stimulating conversation, all too brief, as always. We could probably listen to you for a couple of hours, but I'd like to draw the evening to a close. I want to thank you, Antony.
Thank you.
It's been really wonderful insights into the exhibition. Thank you all for joining us, and I'd really urge you, if you have time, to come and see the exhibition at White Cube Masons Yard, which is on view until the 8th of June. And I also want to give a final plug for the catalogue, which is available for sale as you leave this evening. But anyway, thank you, Antony, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.